Welcome to Peculiar Tales, the show where we dive into the stranger things in history, urban legends, ghost stories, and anything else we find, well, peculiar. I'm Christy.
And I'm Dawn. So, Christy, how do you feel about a good mystery?
I love a good mystery.
Now, when I say mystery, though, I mean like something that for hundreds of years cannot be explained. Nobody can figure it out.
I almost, I'm one of those people who I love an ending to things. I don't
Hmm
do well with no ending. But when it comes to mysteries like that, there's just something so intriguing about a mystery that still, no matter how long, no matter how many people are involved, has still not yet been solved.
Right? I'm with you on that. And today we're going to be telling a story of superstition and abandonment. Part of Nunavut, Canada, is covered in a tundra which is treeless, rocky, and bare. The soil is frozen permafrost, which can extend up to 1,500 meters into the ground. The tundra is laced with shallow puddles and streams that are sometimes called lakes and rivers. During most of the year, Lake Anjikuni is a flat plain of ice and snow. This part of Canada is called the Barren Grounds. Nearly 100 years ago, it was called the Barren Lands. Trappers would find shelter and food along the shores of the lakes before moving on. Today's story takes place 95 years ago on the shores of Lake Anjikuni. In November 1930, Mr. Emmett E. Keller, a journalist from the Bee, located in Virginia, wrote an article, Most Curious. A story we are sure he could not imagine would be talked about almost a century later. This is how his story goes.
Far up in the heart of one of the loneliest places on earth, in the Lake Anjikuni country, 500 miles northwest of the port of Churchill, on Hudson Bay, a whole tribe of Inuit vanished. Somewhere, somehow, the endless desolation of Canada's northern barren lands has swallowed up 25 men, women, and children. It was discovered by Joe LaBelle, a roving trapper of the barren lands. When he came upon the tribe's abandoned camp, Joe LaBelle admits that stumbling on the abandoned village gave him the creeps, going on to say, a man doesn't get the creeps readily when he spends months at a time trudging by all alone across the barren lands, where there is never a house, human being, or anything to break the white-rimmed silence. But all the same, Joe LaBelle got the creeps. Emmett goes on to explain that the empty sky and the silent, rocky plains held a mystery, and the trapper did not like it. Not at all. Even when he spied the tent colony, Joe said he sensed there was something wrong. Joe beached his canoe on the edge of the lake 100 yards or so distant, and he let out a hail of greeting as he walked up. But there was no answer. Then 2 half-starved husky dogs crawled out and came towards Joe. They did not snarl or bark as huskies usually do with a stranger. They crept up, whining dolefully. The bodies of 7 dead sled dogs were laying around. In Joe's words, this is his accounts.
A village of the dead. There were 6 tents made of skin. I'll admit that I went into the first tent. I was a little jumpy, he said, just looking around. I could see the place hadn't known any human life for months, and I expected to see corpses inside, but there was nothing. There was nothing there but their personal belongings of a family. A couple of deer parkas were in one corner, with fish and deer bones scattered about. There were a few pairs of boots and an iron pot, greasy and black. Under one of the parkas, I found a rifle. It had been there so long it was rusty. The whole thing looked as if it had been left by people who had expected to come back. But they hadn't come back. I went outside and I looked over the rest of the camp. I'll tell you, I was puzzled. I figured there had to be about 25 people in the camp. But all signs showed the place hadn't been lived in for nearly 12 months. As I strolled about with these two walking skeletons of dogs following me, I found the other tents in similar state. I tried to figure out where the Inuit had gone to. They hadn't moved to a new territory, or they had taken their equipment, especially the guns and their dogs. Then I thought of the Inuit's evil spirit, Tornark, who has an ugly man's face with two long tusks sticking up from each side of the nose. The people live in fear of this, and they were charms to ward him off. I thought about him, and I had to make an effort to put the picture out of my head.
I walked into another tent. One side had been ripped to ribbons by the wind. On the floor were 3 fox skins, made worthless by the rain and snow and mud. Under them was another rusty rifle. Those 2 rifles seemed strange. The last thing an Inuit would ever part with was his rifle. One of the dogs brushed up against my leg and whined, and I thought of that Tornark, and I got outside. I went down to the lake and wondered if the whole tribe had gotten drowned. But that sounded silly, unless they all committed suicide, which didn't seem likely. Then I found one of the most puzzling things of all. It was a grave, with a cairn built of stone. But for some reason, the grave had been opened. The stones had been pulled off to one side, and there was nothing inside of the cairn at all. I had no way of telling when it had been opened or what had been done with the body it had once contained. Joe stayed all afternoon, trying to figure things out, and had found no sign of any struggle. Everything seemed peaceful. Joe went on to say, "The air seemed deadly. I caught a few fish out of the lake and gave them to the 2 dogs. And then I moved on. I did not want to spend the night there."
During the season, LaBelle visited a dozen or so Inuit camps, but in none of them could he find anyone who knew anything of the deserted camp. Most of the Inuit, when he told them about it, blamed it on Tornark, and then they let it go at that. Officers of the mounted police trying to trace the lost tribe are equally puzzled. They say the tribe may have perished in a blizzard while off on a caribou hunt, although admitting that it was unlikely that all the women and all the children would have gone along. Pestilence occasionally strikes the camps, but in that case, there would have been bodies. One clue did come to light, but it didn't lessen the puzzle. A tribe living about 150 miles north of the abandoned camp has an adopted 10-year-old Inuk boy who seems to have wandered into the camp one day a few months ago, and he does not belong to any nearby camps. But the boy and the tribe are reluctant about things, and nobody has learned anything from them so far.
Another time, an Inuk named Sumek was brought down to a hospital on the Hudson Bay Railway for treatment of frozen legs. It was thought that he might know something about it. So after a long search, another Inuk was found that could speak the language of Sumek's dialect, and he began to question him. Sumek refused to talk about it, mentioning Tornark and refusing to answer any questions. So it occurred to the authorities that Sumek might talk if he got intoxicated. So the questioner was given a quart of whiskey and was told to ply Sumek with it. This too failed. Sumek refused to touch a drop. Like most Inuit, he did not like the taste of whiskey. So any knowledge that Sumek might have had remained a secret. Emmett went on to say at the end of his article, "The police are doing their best to unravel the mystery. They might succeed. On the other hand, the Arctic is full of mysteries. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the Northern Lights keep their secrets."
So,
That's pretty weird. It would be weird to come upon a empty village.
The article's right. It would be creepy. It would be pretty creepy, like you're walking up and there's just nobody there.
It's like one of those like ghost village, those abandoned old-timey towns. Like
Yeah.
that's got to give you some sort of shivers walking upon that.
Yeah, because like he's saying, like there's dead dogs, there's like pots still hanging as if they were waiting to be used, and everything's like tattered.
Right.
They're,
Which leads me to think maybe they were gone for a little while.
yeah, yeah, but I don't know, like he doesn't talk about, like there's a few guns, you
Right,
know,
which seems really strange. Why would you leave those behind unless you were in a rush and those were just the two that got left?
yeah, because like how many times, like when a person's hurrying, you're not thinking clearly, so it's not like you're going down the whole list of got this, got that,
Right, packing a bag for a
right?
sleepover.
Yeah. So there's many versions of this story all over the internet. Most stories sound a bit like the original article that was told to you. And some stories say that Joe seen beached kayaks on the shore, that the dead dogs were tied to stumps, that there was still food in the pots hanging over the fires, that the tribe was 2,500 strong. Some stories involve a trapper in the area named Armin Laurent, and he described seeing a large cylindrical object in the sky in the area where the village was just days before. Some versions say that Joe contacted the mounted police and a Sergeant J. Nelson conducted a search with other RCMP officers and spoke to Mr. Loren. Now, fast forward to 1959. It's 29 years later. A book was written titled Stranger Than Science, written by Frank A. Edwards. The book gave way to interest in the mystery. Now, understand that Frank was one of the pioneers of radio. He had a program called Stranger Than Science. The program discussed UFOs and aliens. This seemed to be Frank's wheelhouse, I guess you could say. Frank had written many other books on these subjects as well. When it comes to this mystery and his accounts of it, he makes no mention of how he obtained his information. However, on the cover of his book, he writes this: astonishing stories of the strange events, all authentic, all true. Now, keep in mind, it is also said that Mr. Edwards was known to embellish a story for the sake of interest. Frank's accounts of the story in his book differ in these ways. Clothing was from sealskin, the food was over cold fires, rifles were by the doors, 3 kayaks beaten by waves on the shore, and the stone cairn was in 2 piles. And that the Mounties examined the berries in the pot to determine that they were gone for 2 months and had just left before the winter came.
Magazines, books, and newspapers made reports around the world communicating the description of the events as an alien abduction. A group called Australian Skeptics in 1988 contacted the RCMP historian S.W. Horrell, who had said that they had interviewed RCMP officers from that time and that no one remembered anything, that there was absolutely no information anywhere in the records, other than the stories that were told on it. The historian also wrote that the RCMP thought this story to be a ridiculous tale.
So we have a few things here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at the story, you have the theory of supernatural. They have this like spirit or creature, that they're terrified of.
Mm-hmm.
The Tornark.
Tornark.
Like they're wearing charms to ward this thing off, right? So it's pretty serious to them.
Right.
It's a big deal. So there's that aspect of the story, of the mystery. Like maybe they were scared off by it and they're like,
Right.
gotta go, because in our story that we tell in the beginning of the episode, that is from the newspaper article,
Right.
from Joe's own words, supposedly, like we weren't there.
Right.
Um, and he doesn't say anything about finding any vessels. No canoes, no kayaks in his story.
No, which
That's an embellishment.
right, which leads you to believe that maybe they all fled to their kayaks, canoes, and fled from the area. So something feels like maybe,
Like maybe they thought they were haunted.
right, or in danger of something. But then there's also like the alien theory, right? Because
Hmm.
you later on they talk about a possible like cylindrical shaped object in the sky.
Which can't be ruled out. Again, we weren't there.
Right, exactly.
Like, like we don't know if he was just saying something, and we don't know if he he really saw this or he really thought he saw this, because what we didn't write in the story, what we didn't talk about, is that Armin Laurent actually had two sons, and his two sons also through time backed their dad's story up.
So it was obviously something he passed down, a story that he told.
Yeah. Now, there are a lot of people that say that it's out there, that say Frank Edwards made the whole thing up. Now, if you're going to go with that theory, then you have to be able to explain how in 1959 he wrote a newspaper article and got it published in the 30s.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an interesting.
Unless what he did was saw the article and then put a more
Yeah.
spin on it, a science.
Because he does have a lot of books,
Hmm.
and he's put what seems like a lot of energy, time, and money into trying to convince the world of the alien theory,
Right,
and that this was another opportunity.
right.
There's one last theory that Mr. Emmett E. Keller was a really good journalist, and maybe he made the whole darn thing up.
Right. Because I mean, I don't think there was too many people in the 30s checking sources on that when he's
Right?
saying, I spoke with somebody and this is what they said.
Right? So it says in nowhere when Joe LaBelle found the camp.
Right.
Even in the original story, it doesn't say when, but the story was written in November.
Okay.
Now, he's a trapper, he's moving along. These are possibly, like, even if it wasn't frozen like lake, it I can't imagine it's easy to paddle through that. Okay. Like, it's going to be slushy at times at best.
Hmm.
So it's my point is that it's going to take a while to get to somewhere.
Right.
It's not like he was in a car and he's just going.
Right.
He's on foot, or he's got a sled dogs or something, a boat, when he's traveling across country.
Right.
So it's going to take a while to get to Virginia from Nunavut.
Right. Unless,
Like, does it take years? Does it take
yeah,
months? Like,
yeah, I
what? I don't,
don't know how long that would take.
again, didn't accompany him.
Right.
So not sure. Um, but I mean, all these theories are out there, all
Right.
these versions, right? So whatever you choose to believe, the article written the year of the vanishing, or maybe you believe that aliens abducted the village, or maybe the village was so scared of the Tornarch they fled as fast as they could, not caring about their belongings or the dogs or the guns. They just needed to leave from pure fear and terror. Maybe that's why Joe LaBelle never mentions in his words that there were any canoes or kayaks. Or lastly, maybe you believe that this whole story and every version was just fiction. A man from Virginia with a good imagination. The RCMP say nothing was ever told to them, and that they knew nothing of this before people started to ask them questions and share the information. As for us, well, we certainly find this story to be very peculiar. Thank you for listening to us today, and be sure to follow us on our social media platforms like Facebook and Instagram. And until the peculiar calls for another tale, bye for now.